Hello and welcome to MetalshubTalks with me, Samir Jaber. In today's episode, I'm very pleased to be joined by Mr. Lee Marshall, Chief Executive of the Cast Metals Federation, the UK's leading trade association for the foundry industry. Lee, it's a pleasure to welcome you to MetalshubTalks. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. It's our pleasure. Now, Lee, when we talk about foundries, we are talking about an industry that sits behind many of the products and systems we rely on every day, right? Castings go into automotive, aerospace, energy, infrastructure, and many other parts of the industrial economy. But the industry also faces a highly demanding environment itself, from energy costs to raw material volatility, supply chain disruptions, sustainability requirements, and increasing pressure on competitiveness. So all these are pushing foundries to rethink how they operate. And this is where digitalization becomes such an important topic. And across the sector, and of course, other similar industries, we are seeing the implementation of technologies such as simulation, digital twins, process monitoring, automation, and more recently AI that are starting to change the approach to production, to quality control, to energy efficiency, and decision makings. And this does not stop at the shop floor, right? So procurement and supply chain management are also major parts of the digital transformation story. And we know that foundries depend on complex raw material supply chains, and many teams still manage various parts of procurement and supplier management through different fragmented tools and workflows that tend to require a lot of manual efforts. It's been the case for quite a while. And this is where digital platforms like MetalsHub are central to today's procurement workflow. So this is what I'd like to explore with you today.
Mm.
How is digitalization being adopted across the foundry industry, especially in the UK? Which technologies are creating the more sort of the most practical value? And how can digital procurement help foundries improve their visibility, their resilience, their procurement efficiency in general, and
Yeah.
competitiveness? So we have a proper discussion on our hands. And for you, our live audience, to engage with us, check out the chat and question sections at the bottom right corner of your screen. You can always send in your chats. Let us know where you're joining us from, what your expectations are, and if you have any questions for Lee and me, you can always get to the question section and throw in your questions there. We'll get to them in the Q&A session towards the end. All right, so Lee, I'd like to start by giving you the space to introduce CMF and yourself properly. So for those who may be less familiar with the Cast Metals Federation, could you briefly introduce the organization, its role within the UK foundry industry, and what you do as chief executive?
Okay. Yeah. No. Sure. So CMF is what we call a trade body or a trade association. So we have members, and we basically work for our members. And our members in this case are either foundries or foundry suppliers operating in the UK. So we've got a mix of both foundries and foundry suppliers, and they could be people, organisations who are supplying services, equipment, technology, etc., into foundries operating in the UK. And I suppose we do two basic things. So we do in what I would call inward facing things. So that's for our members. So things like information provision is a big one, organizing events, knowledge sharing, networking activities, all those sorts of things that members would benefit from. And, they would probably say that's what they pay their membership fee for to a certain extent. That's what they may
Mhm.
see back from it. But then there's also what I would call an outward facing aspect to CMF, and that's where we advocate on behalf of the industry. Now, a lot of the time, that's probably to policymakers, at national, regional level. Obviously, in the UK, we have devolved government, so we have members across the whole of the UK. So it's looking at the governments in Northern Ireland, Scotland, as Wales, as well as the Westminster ones, but also advocating to maybe other parts of the manufacturing sector. So maybe people higher up the manufacturing chain, and also particularly, I think, for the foundry industry, advocating for it is a nice place to work. We want people to come into the industry and help us grow and develop, and we need that skills, not only retaining the skills we've got, but bringing new people into the industry. So it's a
Hmm.
mixture of that sort of, like I say, inward facing for members and outward facing. But basically, we're here for members at the end of the day. We're a membership organisation. So anything we can do to help members either in their day job is what we're here to do on one way or another.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, let's talk about sort of the current status quo. So, as I mentioned earlier, foundries remain essential for different sectors that we rely on daily in our infrastructure and our sort of daily life.
Mm.
So, from your perspective, what is the current state of the UK foundry industry? What do you see happening so far in general, especially when it comes to the operations and how people deal with sort of all the supply chain disruptions and issues that are happening around?
Yeah, it's interesting for me because I've been in the role about 9 months now, and I've come from a very different sector. So I'm still learning about the sector and what it does. But I think, talking to members at our meetings, it feels like where we are now, in sort of, midway point just gone of 2026, is probably a more optimistic position than maybe we were 9 months ago. So
Hmm.
I think the second half of 2025 leading into 2026, things were a bit more depressed in terms of the outlook and the orders, etc. And I think that it does feel from what foundries are saying that has started to pick back up. So the order books are good. They're getting inquiries in, which is really positive. Obviously, I think there is a slight difference depending on which sector you're supplying into. So at the moment, sectors like defence, aerospace generally are very positive. Also, data center related activities, so maybe industrial gas turbines, they're very positive. Aspects of automotive, not so much maybe, especially on the sort of car side of things. So
Hmm.
commercial side is fairly good actually, seems to be. And some of the issues around the automotive are to do with EVs and the uncertainty around that in the UK. So are
Right.
manufacturers moving over to EVs? Are they not? Are they going to move over at maybe a slower pace than was originally intended? I think there had been some maybe issues around the oil and gas sector, although in a weird sort of way, the conflict in Iran may actually generate some orders and business for that because there's bits and pieces out there that are going to need replacing and repairing and rebuilding.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you may see an upturn in that. And the energy market, depending again on where you are and what you're supplying, can be quite strong. So generally speaking, it feels as though from a UK perspective, we're in a better place than perhaps we were 12 months ago, which is promising for the industry.
Of course, of course. But I mean, you mentioned some of the, if I may call them challenges, whether it's another industry affecting the industry, whether it's maybe sort of down the supply chain or earlier.
Yeah.
So let's look at that a bit. And I mean, in terms of the UK foundry industry, what are the biggest challenges that you've noticed so far? Which of these are having maybe the greatest impact on competitiveness? Right, you mentioned the energy industry. There is an infrastructure, shall I call it volatility, right? So you never know what's happening. You mentioned that you're trying to attract more people into the industry, that this is a good industry to work in.
Mm.
And we know that the industry also has some, in certain areas, some skill shortages, and that requires
Yeah.
more people to come in. So tell us about the biggest challenges that you've noticed in the UK foundry industry.
Yeah. I think that the three sort of big areas are energy costs, um, skills, retention or attraction, and also regulation and the level of it. So yeah, definitely. I mean, it's well known. UK's got some of the highest energy costs for manufacturers, well, across the whole globe. Let alone even sort of Europe, and
Hmm.
that puts you at a real competitive disadvantage straight away from a cost point of view. Um, and it's a personal sort of point of view, but actually the reason for that is the way the policy costs of transitioning to a decarbonised grid are put on manufacturing. So actually, the fact that UK has one of the most decarbonised grids is a positive thing. So that's good, and that puts us potentially in a strong place for things where CBAM and other carbon cost measures are coming in. But unfortunately for our businesses, it's the way it's the way that has been paid for has been through putting it all on to manufacturing bills rather than perhaps more through general taxation. So we're doing a lot of work in terms of our advocacy on that side of things. So we've had a recent consultation where the government are trying to bring down some of the energy costs for energy intensive companies, and they've got a scheme called BICS. And originally, when they first consulted, foundries weren't included in that. So we've lobbied hard. We've managed to get 2 out of the 4 foundry SIC codes included, so iron and steel foundries. So okay, a partial win. That's a positive step forward that policymakers realise there's an importance there that they need to support the industry. Obviously, we want to include the others in there as well. So we want to see progress on that, and I think there's recognition from policymakers that something needs to change. So I would say that's a positive step. The issue, obviously, we've got is we're not then seeing that translated into action and into a change of some sort. So we want to keep pushing to see that change. So I think energy is obviously a big one. That would make a big difference to our cost competitiveness in the UK. Then I think, with the skills, some of that's around some of the employment costs we've got. So again, in the UK, we've had 2 or 3 increases in terms of the national living wage, national insurance contributions that employers have to pay. And that's making it harder for to compete locally to attract talent. So, you can't get away from it. There are certain jobs in a foundry that are going to be slightly more uncomfortable than others. You've got the heat, etc. If the pay that the UK foundries can offer isn't that much more than, I don't know, for argument's sake, even working in a supermarket warehouse or something like that, where potentially the working conditions to someone might seem a lot more attractive, it becomes difficult. So, foundries are looking at that and starting to say, well, is there a different way we can look to attract people? So is it the working hours? Is it additions on top of that rather than the salary? And actually, career progression, I think, is a big thing that people perhaps don't appreciate. So I've been going around meeting people in the foundries, and the vast majority of chairmen, MDs, owner operators will tell me they've been there 30 years and they started out as an apprentice, nearly all of them. And to me, going out selling the industry to school leavers, that's a gift. It's like, you can start on what you think is the lowest rung, as it were, but you can end up running the company. And that's not a bad position to be in, if you're coming into
Absolutely.
somewhere. So I think there's positives in there that you can sell. And I think the industry is doing a lot. So there's a lot of people that have got apprenticeships and upskilling and training. And actually, I think what people don't appreciate, and I didn't coming in, is how technical foundries are now. So actually, there's room for computer science students and things like that to come into the industry. So
Yeah, I mean,
it's not just about attracting what you might traditionally consider manual labour. There's a lot of technical jobs out there, quality, etc. That we can, if we can pitch it in the right way, we can get people in.
yeah, I was gonna say, because I mean, you mentioned all of these, I mean, completely valid points and strong points, especially when it comes to attracting people. And one of the points that we've seen across different industries, and now it's coming more and more into the sort of the foundry industry and metals mining in general, is technology. And technology is an attractive sort of feature of work for people, especially people that are looking to, as you said, grow and improve in their career and see how things are, and maybe find or have a perspective of the industry that's different from what it was before, which is purely, uh, in the factory doing the sort of the hard work there. So a lot of people would prefer the technical side of things and the digital side of things as well, and we can see that that is happening across the industry as well. So great points there. I mean, one other point that I would add as well is the idea of international competition. Now, foundries across Europe and across the world, they're all going through similar challenges or similar potentials. Yes, driven by local policies, local competition, local regulation,
Mm,
etc. But basically, supply chain disruptions across the world have a lot of impact on competition as
yeah.
well. I mean, you mentioned the change in the energy sort of industry and how that has a chain effect into the foundry industry as well. But despite all that, there is still continued investment and continued innovation across the sector. We're seeing that happening in the UK, it's happening in Europe, happening elsewhere. You mentioned earlier that there is a bit of optimism around
Mm.
the industry. So, what gives you confidence about the future of foundries in the UK?
Yeah, well, I think, you mentioned investment there, and we are getting that. So, despite potentially tough global market conditions, UK foundries are investing, and they're investing in different things. And it's interesting for me, again, coming in sort of new, and there may be foundrymen watching this who will probably chuck something at the screen in a minute, and so apologies for them. But actually, we talk about a foundry, but a lot of UK foundries now aren't a foundry. Yes, there's a foundry at the core of it, and there has to be. But there's all these other processes, value-added processes that are now undertaken in the same place that perhaps 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago would have been farmed out to a different company. So
Right.
actually, a lot of these facilities now I almost see as advanced manufacturing facilities with a foundry at its heart. So it's
Mhm.
got to start with the foundry, it's got to start with the casting, but all the value added that they then put on. I mean, you look at the plant that Wall Coleman down in Swansea opened recently, and I think that was 2.5 million investment or something like that. Massive investment for that firm for value added. And when you look at all the value added they put on around it, coatings, etc., that's their speciality. And again, Silotech up in the northeast, and the stuff they're doing with the microwave technology they've got there. That again, they're a foundry at their core, but all the other stuff. So I think when you talk about competitiveness of the UK, a lot of people will automatically look at the price. And yes, when you look at high volume, low value products, the UK is going to have more difficulty competing there. But
Mhm.
when you start looking more at the high end stuff and the highly engineered stuff, that's where I think the competitiveness in the UK is really, really strong. And I think you see that with the sort of investment we're doing. We're starting to get foundries now in the UK that are looking at what you might call rapid prototype work. So, and this has come
Right.
about because they've adopted 3D printing, maybe in investment casting or sand casting, so they can turn around iterations of castings of molds very, very quickly with the 3D printing technology. So again, we're very competitive in that area. Now, the issue we've got is potentially once we've gone through that rapid prototyping, we may not then, the foundry that does that may not then get the ongoing work from the actual production run.
Right.
So that's what we want to try and potentially do next, is not only do we want the rapid prototype work, but actually we want the production run that comes out of that. And some of
Right.
that, will come down to cost. But again, we're also starting to see competitiveness come out in a slightly different way, perhaps in terms of sovereignty and resilience. And again, I think this has been brought to the fore because of the conflicts in firstly Ukraine and then in Iran. And organizations are starting to look at those supply chains, which traditionally have been grown up to be global, and going, actually, do we need to make them a bit more resilient by being a bit more geographically tight, as it were? So
Mhm.
foundries in the UK are starting to get reshoring inquiries. So perhaps work that perhaps previously they or someone else did went to another country, and perhaps it may come back. Now, we at the moment it's more inquiries than the work, but the fact that we're starting to get the inquiries coming back to the UK is a positive sign. So again, how can we be competitive in other areas? And digitalisation is a good example of that, and tech is a good example of that. Adopting those, whereby maybe we can get the cost base down a little bit more, that would then enable us to get some of those reshoring inquiries into actual production runs again.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you mentioned digitalization, and I mean, I like the way you've sort of rephrase foundries into advanced manufacturing facilities with foundries at the core. That's a great way to describe it, because we've seen all of these new technologies being implemented across the sector and across different parts of what a foundry would do. So digital transformation is such a buzzword that's used everywhere, right, across so many industries. So when we look at digital technologies in this space, how are you seeing these technologies being adopted? I mean, like I can tell you, for instance, that the terms such as Industry 4.0 and terms such as digital twins, I mentioned it earlier, and simulation and automation, these are all valid terms, valid technologies, really important technologies to improve efficiency, whether it's in terms of cost efficiency or time efficiency, um, uh, and make the even in terms of maintenance, the work better when it comes to predictive maintenance, instead of waiting for the issue to happen and then solving it, etc., etc. So, what are your thoughts on that? How do you see digital technologies being adopted across foundries today?
Yeah, I think it's being adopted in a range of ways. I mean, again, having visited a couple, some of the automation that's there now. So, I naively would never have assumed that I'd have seen robots, pouring ladles of molten metal into molds. But you've got that aspect in there, and all of that requires digitization. And then you're seeing it actually across all the foundries. So again, I've visited one where they've got a complete data collection, monitoring, managing system, and you've got someone there almost sat in sort of the equivalent of mission control, and they're looking at all aspects of production and machines. So, for example, they're looking at what's the machine utilization, maybe in the machine shop finishing, equally in the foundry itself. Can they get more utilization out of that? When was the last time it was maintained? All this sort of data that's trying to increase the efficiency of the operation, in effect. So, can they pour more castings more quickly, longer, etc., getting that throughput going? Can they maintain the machines longer by looking at them more regularly, maintenance provision, all that sort of stuff? So there's a lot of what you might consider shop floor applications for the digitization, but I think there's also a lot of back office, and I think people forget that actually it's just as important to look at your back office systems, and whether that's something as simple as your HR, or looking at things like quality control, pattern making, that sort of thing. I mean, the industry's been served for a long time by sort of simulation software, and that itself is advancing more and more and more. And again, with things like the 3D printing.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely just general data collection. And it was interesting. We had a net zero forum a couple of weeks ago, and someone made this distinction between, let's get this right, monitoring, measuring, and managing. So,
Right.
sort of three different levels. Yeah, you can collect all this data, so you can monitor all these machines. But if that's all you do, what actually use is it? And sometimes that's what people might think of as digitization. Right, let's collect all this data. Right, now we're going to monitor it, take a step up. Right, now we're going to, let's have a look and see what this data may tell us. And managing is actually, right, the data is telling us this, let's react to it that way. And someone actually made a really interesting point about maybe, because quite often people just say, right, let's collect the data, collect all the data we can. And a lot of the time you don't do anything with it, or it's not useful data to collect. So you're actually hurting yourselves from an efficiency point of view. But someone made the interesting point that maybe there is a case in certain circumstances for collecting data now that you actively make the decision not to manage or monitor, but actually at some point in the future you think there may be a place for it. So actually almost having that backlog of data you can go back to will prove useful in the future. Now that's really difficult to sort of pick out what, if we all had a crystal ball knowing what would be good in the future, the UK foundry industry would be thriving beyond belief. But so I think data is the one that's coming out for me in a massive sort of way. It's then how you bring it all together and how you use it, I think, is where foundries are still finding their feet in some instances. But then there are some instances of foundries really, really running with this sort of stuff.
That's a great point. And I mean, speaking with about data collection, I completely agree that without actually acting on it, then what are you doing with it?
Yeah,
It's just sitting data, right? But looking at how artificial intelligence is being used today,
yeah,
it's thirsty for data as much as possible to learn first and then apply. So this could be a great way to bring AI into the operations of foundries, whether it's on the shop floor or in other aspects of the business as well. I mean, you mentioned simulation. I mean, we know that static simulations have been used for years to map sort of mold flows and all that kind of stuff. But looking at the recent rise of digital twins, and this is one of the technologies that I'm always very excited about because I've worked in developing digital twins, and it's really
okay,
an exciting space as well. And it's not only digital twins of a specific product or a specific process, but actually a digital twin of the whole factory. And you can always then do a lot of different virtual scenarios of that factory, regardless of what you're
mm,
looking at in the process, and identify areas of improvements and then actually go and apply them into the process. So, for instance, one example would be predictive defect prevention. So you can prevent a defect beforehand
yeah,
by, instead of inspecting the casting after it cools, uh, you have these sensors, or they're called edge AI models, that analyze sort of real-time variables like pouring speed and mold temperature and humidity, etc., to predict these defects before they actually happen. And then by having that anomaly detection early on, you can go and fix it before it happens in a way. So
yeah, and
that's
yeah,
one way.
and exactly. And again, if you think about where the tech may go in the next 5, 10 years, I mean, obviously at the moment, most of the sensors you have are on the surface, so you never
Right.
really know exactly what's happening inside a casting. But you you can see how there could come a point in the not too distant future where you get sensors so small and what have you that potentially they're in the casting and they're
Hmm.
giving you real data back and things like that. And I think with the AI, I think at the moment foundries are starting to dabble with it and use it, but they're finding their feet with it, and partly that's maybe a skills issue because it's a very different sort of
Right.
technology. So again, you either need to maybe upskill people you've got in there, or you might need to bring the skills in. Now, don't get me wrong, some foundries will have people who are all over it, but there's probably that mix. And again, that's probably a reflection of the fact you've got in the UK, you say UK foundry industry, but that could be a company with 3, 4, 5,000 people in it, or a company
Hmm.
with 3 people in it. So there's a massive spread. But again, someone sort of said at the moment, when it comes to sort of your pouring and your casting, AI doesn't know enough at the
Yes.
moment.
Yes.
So the information we've got, it's in the foundries themselves. But again, as people start to use AI more, there may come a point 5, 10 years time where AI does know enough
Hmm.
and can start to be really helpful in that particular area of a foundry. But I think it's going to take a little bit of time because, like I say, at the moment, it's like a individual. I don't know enough about the foundry industry compared to someone who's been there 40 years. And
Right.
that's
Right.
where
Yeah.
AI is. AI is an apprentice at the moment when it comes to sort of casting itself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And I mean, but it's definitely. I mean, we'll talk about the future in a bit. But I agree. Like, just looking at the volume of data that can be collected in a foundry space and supplied to sort of an artificial intelligence that can either automate the
Mm,
process or improve with visibility, or do the sort of the mundane work or even the dangerous work that people don't need to do by sort of implementing that AI into robots, as you mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of value that comes in this, but
mm,
it does take time to implement. It's also still a costly part of the business. Still, AI requires data centers and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and there's always a challenge there. But I mean, we're talking about digitalization in this sense on the shop floor, and when you say that word when it comes to the industry, that's what people think. But also, digitalization works on other aspects of the business,
Mm.
right? So what we focus on at MetalshubTalks, for instance, is the procurement side of things. So raw
Yeah.
material procurement is a core functionality of the business, and also a core challenge when there is problems with or disruptions in the supply chain. So that part is also crucial when it comes to digitalizing that part, because we know that procurement today, as I mentioned at the introduction, uh, is primarily done in a manual sense, right? You got your phone calls, your
Yeah.
emails, your spreadsheets. I mean, we call them manual. They're still digital on a screen, but in a way they're fragmented. They're not connected to each other. You might lose a lot of data in this siloed
Yeah.
approach. So how do you see the role of procurement evolving within this agenda of digital transformation, if I may call it
Yeah.
such?
I think you're starting to see the take up of a lot more sort of, and apologies to you, to you. I'll call them online platforms,
Mhm,
but yeah, it's that procurement through. I suppose it's almost automation of procurement, of certain aspects of procurement in a way. But some of these online platforms where potentially, like you say, you used to pick up the phone and talk to Fred or Stephanie or whoever, get your prices, get them back, ring them back. Actually, it does all that for you, and sometimes you can actually almost run real time online bidding auctions for certain
mhm.
procurement things, depending on what it is procuring and how you set up and what you want to do. All the documents now are digital and that sort of stuff. So I think there's a lot more uptake of that, and I think what's important for the foundry industry is all the time it's doing this, it's not replacing people. It's actually what it's doing. It's freeing capacity up to become more productive. So that's what I really like coming into the industry is this isn't about cutting roles. Actually, this is about getting really more productive. And
That's a
actually,
cool point. Mm,
the time we save, that person saves there, we can now get them on that, or we can get them on that. Or actually, now what we're doing is, instead of having, I don't know, 5 people pouring, we've got 5 maintenance people with the robots or the AI or the tech, or we've got 4 of those, and we've got someone running the online system. So it's definitely, for me, digitization, from what I can see, is driving productivity in the UK,
mhm.
which I think is, again, when it comes back to competitiveness, easy to say, is really positive, because we've got a lack of movement on energy costs and labor costs. We can't pull those levers. What other levers can we then pull? And the productivity one is a really big one. So again, anything where the digital aspects can help in that is going to be really good. And again, I can see potentially AI coming into some of the procurement stuff. So actually,
True.
and I'm sure this will scare some people, but there may come a point where AI is almost doing a lot of the buying for you, or up to a certain point is doing all the negotiation for you.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
Mm,
and we see that happening in sort of indirect procurement and other aspects of different markets where they're testing AI as a tool to do that
mm,
function. But it's interesting that, I mean, I think you mentioned a really important point is the fact that this is not putting people out of their jobs. It's
yeah,
actually improving what they're doing. I mean, a
yeah,
few weeks ago, in another MetalshubTalks Talks episode, I hosted some great guests from the MAT Foundry Group,
yeah,
which is also a UK Foundry group. And one of the themes that stood out was that digitalization was not only helping them improve efficiency in their procurements, but it was also strengthening supplier management and audit readiness, which is a crucial part as well, because they also
yeah.
supply the automotive industry. Not to mention compliance processes, both internal and external. So, do you see similar priorities emerging across sort of the wider industry?
Yeah, and I think the audit point is a really good one as well, because again, the way the UK works with its energy costs, you sort of start off by paying a large amount, and then there's various schemes you apply to try and get your bills reduced if
Hmm.
if you're lucky enough to get them. But with those comes certain proof and compliance. So again, going back to the data collection I was talking about earlier on, while you're not collecting it primarily for a compliance point of view, it does go towards that. So again, all this data collection and data crunching that potentially you can start to use AI for, you're collecting one data set, it goes almost into a central place, but then you're pulling it out. Right, let's pull it out and crunch it for compliance. Let's pull it out for energy monitoring. Let's pull it out for carbon reporting. So again, things like CBAM coming forward and carbon
Yeah.
reporting on that aspect. Again, getting as much of that digitized is gonna help. We're only going to see, I think, carbon reporting in one shape or another becoming more and more to the fore, and especially in a sector in an industry like castings where you're using
Hmm.
it, they are energy intensive. Now, again, we're in a good position in the UK with our grid being more and more decarbonised. That should give us a competitiveness edge somewhere when it comes to aspects like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely looking at the compliance and the audit and the more and more reporting we've got to do, either because we're reporting to up the chain to customers, suppliers on carbon or the source of materials, etc., or because you're trying to get money through the energy intensive scheme or the big scheme or whatever comes up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you're right. I mean, and we've seen like MetalsHub has been working with foundries for quite a while now, providing that sort of platform for foundries to not only do the tendering, but also in terms of supplier management, in terms of documentation, contract management, even inventory management, which is also
Mm.
part of the process as well. Um, so one of the reasons that CMF partnered with Metals Hub today was to help foundries accelerate their digitalization
Yeah.
of procurement. And so from what you've seen so far, where are the biggest opportunities for foundries to improve their competitiveness through sort of what Metals Hub is offering, which is structured procurement and supplier management processes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I think it's one our members talk about at the moment is the supply of metals,
Hmm.
which is obviously is fundamental to what they do. But again, because we've grown into a global market, global events have impacts. So we're seeing it at the moment, particularly I think at the moment with aluminium, there's issues around the supply of that. And again, when it comes back to sovereignty as well, and I think this is where a platform like yourselves and the digitization, if you're looking as much as possible for sovereign supply, which our foundries do as much as they possibly can, but at the end of the day, they're running a business, so there will come a price tipping point where they go, look, we've got to go abroad for that.
Hmm.
Whereas potentially, through platforms like yourselves, there may be the opportunity to do a bit more investigation that unearths for them a UK-based supplier at a price that's relevant for them and right for them, and also in terms of supply conditions. Because again, you talked about inventory.
Yeah.
Most businesses and foundries are no different. Are going to want to hold as minimal inventory as they possibly can because it's cost tied up.
Yes.
But again, I think foundries and others are looking again at what that means, again, because of the global supply chains. You're never going to get away from those totally. Actually, maybe we've become too lean, and that's
Hmm.
caused us issues. And maybe there's a new balance that may be at a slightly higher level than previous levels. So again, for me, what the technology gives you is better information more quickly. So again, using a procurement tool like yourselves is going to give foundries much more knowledge of the market, much more real time knowledge of the market, and that should make their decisions better informed. So,
True.
that ultimately that should be better for their business because they're making better informed decisions about the materials that they're purchasing.
Agreed. Now, I'm mindful of the time, and I don't want to go too much over time. Although I have a lot of questions for you, and I'm really enjoying this discussion. But let me maybe close with a forward-looking question before we move into Q&A. I'm already
Mm,
seeing some questions from the audience, which is great. We'll get to them right after this. But I mean, let me phrase it this way. How mature would you say digital adoption is today in foundries in the UK? And if you look ahead, say 5 years, maybe even 10 years, if I can
mm.
push you to do that, I mean, because you never know what's happening
No,
in that time frame. What do you think a modern competitive foundry would look like?
Whew, that's a good question. I think in terms of the adoption, we're at the earlier stages probably, and I think
Okay.
again that's probably partly reflection of the range of companies you've got. So you've probably got some of the bigger companies. They've got the opportunity to invest. They've got the funds to invest, so they're doing that. That said, I've already been around some what you might consider SMEs who are adopting this sort of technology. I think for some of the smaller organizations, we're probably not there yet. And there's probably more of a hand holding that needs to be done for them because there just isn't the capacity in terms of sheer numbers, which probably then means that the skills aren't necessarily there. And again, that's where a trade body would potentially come in. If we can help some of the foundries with things like this, webinars, case studies, those sorts of things, then I think we'll see the adoption taken forward. I mean, if we look forward in 10 years' time, I think foundries will be doing, again, I'm saying foundries, but these advanced manufacturing plants will be doing a lot more of the value added, a lot more of the
Mhm.
value added. And I think in the UK, the tech that they're using will have gone on another 2, 3, 4 notches. So I think that's where we're really competitiveness is our technical know-how and then that comes out in the quality. I think the quality is almost one of the UK's USPs in my book in terms of metal casting. If the UK can't cast it, it probably can't be cast.
Mhm.
I was at an event up at the AMRC recently, and we can't shy away from the issues we've got. But as the trade body person, I sort of said, look, we need to shout about what we do in the UK because there's so much good stuff that we do that we should be shouting about it and telling people about it. And I find it interesting at the moment, the current political climate, that the potential change in prime minister, and they're starting to talk about reindustrialization.
Mhm.
And I get it, but I would say, well, the industrialization is already there. We don't need to
Yeah.
we need to grow it and improve it. We don't need to reindustrialize because that implies it's not there. Again, so for me, I want to really shout about the industry and go, look, we do some amazing stuff. I mean, again, the recent example, Sargensons and the work they're doing with Aston Martin and lightweighting the chassis for the EVs and the castings look like it's something from another world. There's
Mhm.
not one straight line on them. So there's amazing stuff out there. So I think in 10 years' time, it'll almost be a supersized version of some of the class leading stuff we've got now with new bits of kit, new bits of tech, lots more digitization, lots more integration of AI.
Agreed. I mean, it's almost inevitable that the world and the industry itself will go the digitalization route, the AI route. Not only because like the technology itself is inevitable, but the potential benefit from it, the
Yeah.
potential improvement from it, the growth that will come, even the improvement in skills and how
Mm,
people can learn skills and develop their skills. It's already improving fast. So that's a great point as well. Now, I'll try to jump through straight into Q&A very
yeah.
quickly. We'll probably squeeze a couple of questions before we end. But Lee, thank you so much for this. I mean, it's great, and there's always not enough time to have these discussions because it's always fun. So let's see what the audience has asked. And I mean, one point is on AI, and we talked about it already, but it's an interesting question because it's talking about resistance. So when it comes to the adoption of AI or adoption of digitalization, how much is the resistance of factories happening that you've seen maybe in the UK? Because I
Yeah.
mean, of course, there will be resistance. We've seen that
Yeah.
resistance also when it comes to procurement workflows and procurement ways of work. Like, this is what I'm used to for the past 20 years. Why would
Yeah,
I change it now? Type of thing, right? And that's a
yeah.
valid question.
It is, and I think when I come up against that personally, because people always assume that what you're saying they've done is wrong, and that's not the case. It was right at the time, but things move on around you. So
Hmm.
that's why you need to change, not because it was wrong then, but it's not right for the future. And I think also, especially again, when you get to the nuts and bolts of actually making a casting, there is so much knowledge in the industry, in the factories at the moment, and to a certain extent, you're never going to be able to replace that. And
Yeah.
but it's getting across to people that's not what we intend with AI. So it's not taking the knowledge of, I don't know, John, who's been pouring castings for 30 odd years and can just look at it and go, that ain't going to pass quality.
Hmm.
And those people exist and they're great and we should celebrate them. It's about how we can enhance their knowledge with the AI. And
True.
I think some of it is just actually you're going to have to walk some people through it and show them. So again, one of the things we want to do as a association is try and build up a case studies of where foundries are using AI,
Hmm.
so we can start to show back to members. Actually, look, here's what people are starting to do now. It may be that they don't copy that, but it sparks an idea off. Well, actually, we could sort of use it in a similar way, but then tweak it this way and the other. So I think some of it is just seeing it
Yeah.
and almost going to other foundries that use it and prodding it and testing it and asking the questions about, well, what did you find out? What were the problems, etc. So I can understand the resistance because there's a lot of good knowledge in the foundries. It's just so it may take a little bit of time just to start to break that down. But the way that'll happen is slowly by people adopting some of this
Sure.
tech.
Yeah, and I mean, any new technology will always face the resistance stage early on, especially if the perception is that there's fear of it revolutionizing everything and changing
Yeah.
everything. And that's not what technology does. Over time, it does do that sort of change, but when it comes to the way of work, it tends to actually improve it,
Mm.
maybe change it for the better, adjust certain parts of it, even automate parts of it that you don't
Yeah.
want to do them anymore, the mundane parts of work, and also increase accuracy and
Yeah.
efficiency as well, which is crucial. So I agree with you, and I think resistance is completely normal,
Yeah.
and it's on us tech companies and sort of foundations and organizations to educate more, to give more
Yeah.
knowledge about why tech is good rather than something that can come and just taking our jobs or whatever.
Yeah.
So
And I think that's really important. It's the why. Let's
yeah,
if we can explain the why, then that makes it a lot easier for people to get on board.
I agree. I agree. And I mean, it's a good point that I mean, you mentioned you're starting to look at what or how foundries are implementing AI in their processes. I mean, one of the things that Metals Hub has been doing rather quietly, but we're starting to make some noise about it, and is actually implementing AI in procurement workflows. And now
Mm.
we've been a digital platform for a long time. We've been pushing for this, and with the amount of data that comes from procurement and how secure digital platforms like Metals Hub tend to be in maintaining data privately for each company, AI can be a crucial technology there to
Mm.
support again the mundane parts of work and the data that is fragmented across so many different PDFs
Mm.
and
Yeah.
files and phone logs and etc. So instead of one person going and trying to find all of that information and data, AI can collect it and put it into one
Yeah.
space, and you can actually analyze it. So we'll be talking about AI actually in upcoming webinars soon enough. So for the audience, if you're interested, check out our website and stay tuned there. We'll do some updates there as well. But I'm sure, yeah, AI is a crucial technology today, and it's going to be even more impactful in the future. One last
Oh,
question to you, Lee, before
yeah.
we jump off. And I mean, for other questions that we might not be able to answer, we'll definitely answer them after the event. So fear not, we'll definitely do that. one thing is, I mean, you mentioned that it always comes down to cost and to pricing, and margins today are actually under pressure for foundries. So how can a person in a foundry justify investment in digitalization when margins are already under pressure?
Business is that classic return on investment, isn't it? So it's looking at actually what am I going to get back? So if I'm going to spend my hard-earned money, like you say, and margins are tight, what is it that this is going to do that's going to be worth it? And it's I think like most business decisions, it's being clear about that. And some of that is about accepting what AI maybe can't do at the moment. Being realistic about what it can do and how you want it to work for you. Because at the moment, everyone's saying AI got to have AI.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, it's there, it's useful, but what's it going to do for you that's going to give you the most impact at the moment, that especially in terms of your margins, and
What's the
being
use
quite
case? Yeah.
exactly being quite analytical about actually this is where we're going to use it, and we accept we're not going to use it over here at the moment because either it's not right or the payback's too long, or actually that's not the pain point. If we crack that, that's the thing that's going to open the order book type thing, or increase the productivity, or whatever the aim actually is.
So yeah, it's definitely clarity on the use case, clarity
Yeah.
on the ROI. That's definitely needed, especially now with the hype around AI that tends to
Yeah.
sometimes scare people and sometimes to encourage people in paths that they don't have enough evidence for certain
Yeah.
claims.
I mean, I think just on the back of that, the
Yeah,
other
sure.
thing is if you don't invest now, what is the consequence?
Exactly.
Because
The
again,
cost of inaction. Yeah.
yeah, because if you come back to it in 2 years' time, you may be too far behind the curve then. So that there is looking at that. Well, what if I don't? Consequence as well.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of sort of leading businesses already claiming that today you're behind the curve if you're not today looking into it, and I feel like that's also pushing the narrative and pushing the curve a bit,
Yeah.
but that's still fine. The thing is, the cost of inaction is a critical element of because it's also a decision, right? I mean, not
Yeah.
making a decision is still a decision,
It's still a decision. Yeah.
and it can be really costly if the benefits already outweigh the sort of the drawbacks, and you're not really tapping into these benefits. Lee, thank you so much for sharing such valuable insights into the industry. It's really been a pleasure talking about this with you, and you're always welcome to join me again in a future episode, so we could revisit these topics again if you like.
Oh,
So
no,
thank you
that'd be
so much for
great.
being here. Yeah.
Thank you. No, thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us live or later if you're watching on our website or on YouTube. And as always, it's a pleasure to have you here with us at MetalshubTalks. And keep an eye out for our next episodes. You can check the CMF website if you want to get in touch with Lee and the team. And you can always get to MetalshubTalks.com as well to get in touch with us. So I'll see you in the next one. Take care.